represented than others. A third is that I think we should be cautious of averages. I think there's a sort of tyranny of using average, which hides this great variation in distribution. And that's equally true of the 4-degree or 2-degree temperature rise. If you look at the Met Office's atlas for a 4-degree temperature rise, it is so seriously scary to see what that means in terms of the gradient. A 2-degree temperature rise, has equally got a huge gradient between ocean and land, and between different latitudes. So I think it would be helpful to remind people in the paper a 2-degree centigrade rise, may sound doable. It's got extraordinary extremes over the globe and also over time. And it's the impact of those extreme events that cause much of the problem. I completely agree. The piece on governance and institutions which we wrote needs to be tailored properly to the contours of the paper, and I think I've got a much better sense now and can work with some of you on how we can turn that into a much more kind of relevant package of ideas and measures. And some of the suggestions that you made about innovation in governance and accountability improvements would be really helpful, I think, in terms of bringing that to life. I think it's also important to say something about where we see the real blocks to making progress. I mean, I think we have to be clear that there are people, interests, countries, groups blocking change. Now, you may want to be diplomatic, Bob, though you're not known to be.
No, we do not want to be diplomatic.
I think there's some people manage from them even more undiplomatic than me.
But it would be helpful to identify why, despite the huge amount of knowledge that we have, we've not made anything like the progress that we should have. And that is down in part to serious blockages, to people seeding disinformation, to trying to get, to sap and deny the value of the information that we do have for much more individual interest reasons. And I think we should say that. We need to find ways to identify, contest and organise against those blockers. I think it's critical that we flag, because we live in a world driven by economics, for good or ill, we need to flag the importance of prices representing full cost. We need to flag the importance of getting the right metrics and measurements. So making sure that GDP plus gives us that much broader set of indicators, I think, is really important, because prices kind of get straight into the market bloodstream in a way that regulation and other government tools tend to be much slower to act. And so making prices push the system in the right direction is critical. My last point was, I think one thing we could do, which I think is very important, is to say, okay, Rio, but what about the day after Rio? Can we come in behind support for a global set of sustainability goals that we can build up between now and 2015, when we should have the next climate regime in place, when we should have the post-MDG sort of set of proposals starting to come through, so that you can weave a clear statement of collective intent on sustainability that has got woven into it our sense of where sustainability needs to go, that's linked into climate and development activities, but in a way that is quite different from how the MDGs were formulated. Because the world that we're in today is radically different from the world of the late 1990s in terms of no longer living in this rather false dichotomy of north and south, a much flatter planet, the need for universal goals, the need to move away from this kind of development assistant mentality, which is so clear in the MDG process.
Excellent. I think, I'm not trying to summarise this, but clearly bringing out this issue of vested interest, absolutely crucial. Clearly pointing out averages don't mean much, including in the MDGs. We may meet some of these hunger targets, only because China's done so much, but effectively Africa's gone backwards. So the average on meeting an MDG makes no sense, an average on temperature makes no sense. The whole issue around within an economic framework, we've already mentioned earlier after a meal, GDP is not satisfactory, and then also on price. Unless you have the full cost, internalised externalities, deal with subsidies, but also not going to go in the right direction. So, so several other key points there as well. Good, good. Why don't you say something, Celine, especially as in the next few minutes you're going to write the adaptation piece.
Thank you, Bob. Let me just say a couple of things. Firstly, even though I do work on climate change, I agree that we shouldn't, environment doesn't equal climate change. It's a big message that we should be putting forward. And on the issue of adaptation that's been raised a number of times, obviously that is my particular interest. I'd add a couple of more points picking up on points that were made earlier. I think adaptation is an area where there is generally and genuinely an opportunity to highlight not just South-South learning, but South to North learning. Because the whole face of dealing with impacts of climate change is happening in vulnerable countries by poor communities and countries. And they are actually doing a lot, which doesn't necessarily always get reflected in the global information arena, either in the scientific arena or even the media. And I'll give you the example of Bangladesh, which is one of the more vulnerable countries. They have a climate change strategy and action plan, which actually has 6 pillars, all of the food security, energy security, water security, livelihood security, all of these are pillars, 5 of which are adaptation related, being a vulnerable country, but the 6th is a mitigation related pillar, the energy pillar. And they realize that even though their emissions aren't great, they still need to do something, and they will do something about it, and they intend to do something about it. And the government of Bangladesh has actually put in, over the last few years, $300 million of its own money into implementing this climate change strategy. And they're not waiting for the rest of the world to come to their rescue. And a lot of very innovative things happening at the ground level in communities as well as by government. And this is not just Bangladesh. There are other countries in the south that are doing this. So again, bringing these stories to light, showing these innovative activities that are taking place, and that this is...
You could write something on the adaptation and symbolic. In fact, on the thing I was in Antarctica, there's only a couple of ministers. One was the Environment Minister of Bangladesh, and actually we piped in the President of Bangladesh, actually, the lady actually gave a short presentation as well, by telephone.
Bob, yeah. Comment on what Emil...
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Emil, you are quite right, Talking to the ministers of environment is not enough. And we faced this situation 20 years ago. When I was then the Minister of Environment of Brazil and was in charge of the preparations. And, many of these ministers are colleagues or former colleagues or something like that. And so the language was about the same. And we realized at that time that unless we spoke to the ministers of finance, not much was going to happen. And we did that. The government of Brazil and others decided to have a meeting of the ministers of finance, which I did not attend. That you might have attended. It was in Tokyo at that time. And it was very important, not because they did put money, but because they told their heads of states that they should do something about it. So what occurred to me is that maybe in the 2-page document, but we could raise that issue.
I agree completely.
You know, because, you know, regarding what Roy mentioned, you know, I think we should have more than one document, you know, I mean, the 10-page document will be read by some people, not by ministers, you know. The 2-page document should be sort of policy-oriented in the way of saying, look, well, not that bluntly, but you should do that, you know. And then other documents, like the one that Roy mentioned, which should be prepared, you know, which everybody should understand, you know. And if you have this press conference this week, you know, I think we should give them a glimpse, because this is how press works, you know. They don't want the full story in the beginning, you know. They want to say, well, something interesting is going to happen, you know. This is an interesting group. That's all you need now, you know. But I think it's very important that this feeds into the government process, because the groups in charge in the government of Brazil, probably others, you know, they are looking at this document. There are many brackets here. You know, actually, what I found out is that the best parts are in brackets. And therefore, inputs at this time will be the object of consultations.
Well, I mean, let's be quite candid. In most governments, the environment minister is one of the weakest ministers of ministries. I mean, let's be quite candid about that. I mean, my own minister would agree with that. She has at least got agriculture, which raises her up just a little bit, basically.
Yeah, I want to take a different position from a lot of us positions here. Well, not entirely. You're all saying what's not in the document, the problems we have. I've been involved for the last 20 years working with economists. We have an organization now that started as the Millennium Assessment of Human Behavior in order to look at the social side. I think most of my colleagues are agreed the big issues are cultural, social, and so on, not the science. I think Al Gore has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that simply telling people what the science is has no impact on behavior whatsoever. But what's really missing when you say what they want to come and let's do, one of the things that's really missing is they don't get the overview. That, for example, the footprint analysis, which is far from perfect, tells us to give everybody, the goal is to have a lifestyle like Brits, and to do that you need 5 more Earths roughly. Maybe it's only 3, maybe it's 6, but one can argue about it. But the point is they don't get the point that there's no way that business as usual is going to work. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, every time Obama gives a speech, it is we've got to keep the economy growing at 3.5%. A little bit of an arithmetic exercise will tell you where that leads. Now when I talk about this stuff, I don't say it's just a consumption problem, it's a consumption problem among the rich. John Holder and I and Ann are attacked virtually every day on the web for having pointed out in 1977 there's going to have to be redistribution of access to resources. You cannot duck the redistribution problem. I don't think our paper should focus just on the do, but I think we ought to make a very strong point that there's no choice but to go to these other areas and figure out how to do it.
Yeah, exactly, how to do it. Okay, can I just directly link to that? You said there is a lack of overview. I would like to add as a footnote, there is a lack of overview in the way which is structured for decision making, which is a very essential element. If you are alone, gradually moving towards sustainability with your own organization, city or business organization, not too fast so that you don't get return on investment, but not too slow so that you're not relevant onto the way.
Document focus, the ideas going into Rio are considerably less focused on climate right now, and there's much more focus on sustainable development and green economies and those kinds of things. So if that's the point of engagement, then we need to at least think about how to engage on the kinds of things that they're talking about, and or society push the agenda more towards climate or other things if those are of interest. Beyond that, I think there's a very valid question being raised in several instances this morning about whether Rio is the only thing we're targeting with this, or if it's something broader, whether international governance is the only thing we're targeting, or if it's something deeper at all levels of society. And I like the idea of the same sort of core of thought going into multiple products, one targeted potentially at Rio and international governance kind of things, others targeted perhaps elsewhere. For the document itself and how things are coming together, I think that I quite like the substance. I think a lot of really good material has gone into this. A couple of things that are maybe underrepresented there right now include poverty and energy and adaptation, which were already mentioned. Another one is the marine environment, which is of enormous importance globally, both for geochemical cycles and the global climate and other issues, but also for human livelihoods and food security and many other issues. So I can help come up with some examples there as this moves forward. The point about that Bunker, I think, articulated about really needing to make this come alive and connect with a variety of audiences is a great one. And I think one thing that's going to be important for that is actually using examples rather than just sort of stating problems as abstract or conceptual things, actually having examples in there. You know, maybe they're occasionally can be made humorous, but they definitely need to, I think, can be more compelling. These arguments can be more compelling if they're done with actual tangible examples. In particular, examples that are, you know, as was already also mentioned, already happening now, as opposed to things that are forecast to be happening in the future. The sort of channeling MLK in the introduction, it's always an ambitious thing, but I think I really like it, that we have a dream, and that entire couple of sentences. One, it's a dream. Two, it's pulling together several different things. And three, there's this statement that this is a realizable dream within the next 20 to 30 years. That sentiment, that thing, the integration, the dream, the integration, and the fact that it's achievable are themes that should be carried throughout all of this work, and they currently aren't. The substance is there, but in all of the things that are talked about here, those elements need to be there. So, you know, articulating not just that there's a problem, but there are solutions that are essential. The solutions are ambitious, but the solutions are achievable. And so that proactive focus on solutions, I think, can be a big part of making this more memorable. Another piece of that is, in terms of having this, creating impact with this, is it just going to be sort of remembered as a paper, or is there a way to package it that actually makes it more compelling, like it's 7 principles or solutions, or something that's a little bit more tightly packaged? Bob, you've mentioned having a set of bullets, but I think it's worth thinking about what we actually call those. You know, so it's just not, you know, a paper with some principles in it, but they're actually articulated and named as something that's a little bit more memorable. Integration, I already mentioned, is another thing. As this paper currently stands, there's a number of elements that are discussed. Often there's a couple paragraphs on climate change not really integrated with something else. And all those components are all good, but we need to also emphasize the connections between environment and equity and gender and energy, and because all these things are related, and there's a very important nexus between all of them that's both an indication of the problem, but also is a big reason that that's a big part of the solution, the fact that all these things are related. And then finally, the issue of diplomacy was brought up. So there's these, you know, I think it was Camilla that was saying that there's these blockages that need to be dealt with, and I believe we do need to address the blockages and not pretend that be too diplomatic and ignore them. But I think we also need to recognize that these blockages are often blockages because they are powerful, and almost by definition, because they are powerful, if we don't engage them in being part of the solution, they're going to fail. So it's wonderful to point out blockages, but where we can, it won't always be the case, but where we can, it would be good to talk about how those same agents can be part of the solution. So one particular example would be the private sector and markets. Don't just say that capitalism's evil. It may be that many problems have come about from capitalism and corporations and things like that, but our corporations and markets can be a part of the solution as well. So having both of those components there is useful. Thank you.
Can I just comment on I Have a Dream? We have, the first sentence is Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And the fifth sentence is John Kennedy.
Yep.
And then we go to The Perfect Storm, which is also another issue.
What this is all about, the Blue Planet Prize, how many, 20 years?
20 years.
20 years of given to individuals unconnected to each other, or some institutions, also not usually connected to each other. And all of a sudden, let's say that we had this feeling that we wanted to get together. You inspired us, but we did it, actually, where everybody's super busy. So, you know, these different voices coming together, not feeling that we need to do it alone, but we have to address these things together. I think that's an interesting, that's anyway a problem that we're facing. We're all working in our silos, not only ministers of environment, but everybody. So here's a process that maybe is also a way forward. I think the tone is a little bit hopeless. I don't mind I Have a Dream, and I don't mind the Kennedy speech too, either, although we might try to find something from another culture. I'll see what I can do to help you with that. But still, I think we need to refer to the many challenges that human beings have had in our history. This may be bigger and more global, but we have managed as human beings to overcome them. Look at what this continent, well, Europe, I don't know if the British think they're in this continent, but anyway, where I come from, Central Europe, look at what that looked like 65 years ago. So we are capable. We need to show people that we're capable. By the way, Paul, I think that the Gore film was fun and nice to see. We all, those of us who went to see it, knew the problem. But he stopped before saying to people, "So what can I do?" And I think
the end with the solutions was terrible.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, I think we need to give people some hope. And everybody said that before. I must say, let's just talk a little bit about the audience. Everybody I know is doing a paper for real. And no one is going to read those papers, with all respect to all of us, and all of us are doing papers. So I think, unless you've got that written in stone somewhere, I think we've got to go beyond Rio. Yes, put it into Rio, but there's no mechanism really to put it in, unless you put it in through one of our governments. But, you know, there is a zero draft paper, that's going to be the official document, which needs a lot of help. There is the Global Sustainability Panel's report, which just came out, which has a crazy name, Resilience or something, repeat it twice. It's a pretty good paper, though.
Resilient people, resilient planet.
Right, Resilience is good. It's a pretty good paper, actually, which I think we should read. So I'm worried that if we think this is going to influence Rio as such, I think we need to be realistic. I don't mean to. But I think it's a great idea to do this, and the world is going to continue the day after Rio. Somebody said that. So we need to look beyond, actually, to Rio and really beyond. A lot of important things happening, including, of course, my own Congress that you know about with 37,000 people in Korea, but also, of course, the Millennium Development Goals, 2015 and so on. So then the idea about the audience. I'm kind of tired of saying we're addressing only policymakers. Policymakers yesterday were just normal people, some of them pretty uneducated, some of them maybe not, and the day after tomorrow they may be back to being just normal citizens. So why don't we write a paper that has just simple language? Skip the CBD, I know what it is, but let's spell it out, at least in footnotes, and skip the acronyms if possible, and be a bit more an educated citizen. I'm not saying people who can't read, but I think that's really important. And then I think somehow or other we need to refer to the links to the ongoing processes, the Rio, the work of the Global Sustainability Panel, the Sustainable Energy for All effort that the Secretary General of the UN is doing. Bunker and I are in that group. I think he's doing that partly because he doesn't think anything is going to happen concretely in 2012, so he's got another deadline, 2030, ending energy, connecting all the people, the 1.3 billion people who are not connected to any grid at all. So, and then I think on the governance paper, which I would like to work a little bit on in that group, I said, if Will's probably going to work more on the ecosystems group, if we break into it. I think it's very important now to really mention the local level. If we can't get our act together locally, and it says so sort of in that zero draft paper, and here it talks, I think, only about regional, but you don't go further down. But there's a lot of action happening in the United States at the state level, in city level, mayors. And if we can get our act together locally, then we can, I think, influence the national and maybe eventually the siloed intergovernmental system, which is hopeless in my view. So, and then the other thing, somehow or other, that I think if we want to be influencing Rio and beyond, the other thing that that one hears constantly now is that the voices that need to be heard in these discussions, and we represent in a way, this is quite interesting, but have to represent not only government, but also the so-called civil society, business, NGOs of all kinds. And I think we need to sort of bring that in too. How do we get voices from the different parts of society to be heard in a meaningful manner? But at the end of the day, our biggest challenge, and all of you mentioned this, is how do we actually get human beings to think that it's worthwhile changing their behavior today for a future generation which they're not going to see. I mean, many of us have children, but do we really think about them enough to, how do we do that? The social sciences haven't helped us figure that out. And I don't think we should just be talking about consumption and production levels. I think that's the only way that you mentioned so far in this paper, our behavior. I like that. I don't know who was it. I can't remember who had this very user-friendly definition of sustainable development, which indeed is a journey. You never see the end of it. Treating the earth as if you intended to stay. I quite like that. You know, treating your own house, you treat it a little bit better than that hotel room. Right? Okay, so I forgot to put that paper on the sheet. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a behaviour issue. I mean, I think we all agree that the social issues are incredibly important. At the very end of the UK National Ecosystem Assessment, which I just co-chaired, get to the very last page when I gave my presentation to ministers, and I say, before you get to the last page, there's a truly inconvenient truth, insofar as this coalition only cares about behaviour change. And what it says is, what we collectively said is, we don't know a single issue, environment or development or societal, that has ever been changed without the right mixture of regulations, incentives, and behaviour change. And most behaviour change is stimulated by the regulations and financial incentives. It doesn't occur on its own. It doesn't have to be smoking, recycling, seat belts, crash helmets, biodiversity, climate change. Other than a local pond or a local park, you have to get the right mixture of those three.
I agree completely with the House and Lords Select Committee require in behaviour change, which looked in particular at the nudge unit in the cabinet office and said it was absolute garbage.
Yeah, exactly. It really is garbage as well.
It's a good report. It really says all the things you said.
I agree completely, Bob. I would just like to add a footnote. These decisions, these big decisions, do not come from the blue or from the black or whatever you call it in English. They occur from role models having paved the ground for them and demonstrate that this actually is the way to go. And only then can these big changes appear. And that's why, again, it's so bloody important that we do not neglect the knowledge which goes into how to become a role model without expecting everyone else to change until you should do so. Because then people give it to the politicians and the big international decisions, and until they decide, I don't do it. Because nobody else does. That is ignorance. It is based on ignorance. They don't understand the self-benefit in being more social. Understanding how to stepwise move towards a sustainable situation and become that role model. And it's only in that atmosphere that you can actually create these kinds of decisions. We have a number, and I agree with that we should have positive role models and good examples up front, talking about the big opportunity, how fantastic this is, how great it is, and that a number of business executives and mayors are already benefiting from it, also from a self-beneficial point of view, by moving ahead of the others. That is a way of boosting the possibility of getting into bigger international agreements. Because today, organizations are hurting themselves more than the planet. It is the sum of all bad doings that hurt the planet. But to each individual organization, they hurt themselves more from inherently unsustainable decisions than they hurt the planet, each of them. And they don't understand that. This is a knowledge issue.
Well, I've always argued that those businesses that actually move first have got, I mean, why would a business move? First, you often get first mover advantage. Two, if you're seen to be sustainable, you reach out to that element of the public that cares about environmental or social sustainability. Third, those companies that actually are proactive have a seat at the table in government to work out a common solution, basically. And the fourth often is, if you don't move, do you want to wait until the regulations are going to hit you on the head? You're better to be ahead of the regulations.
But it's not only about regulation. It is about scarcity of resources. It is about trust amongst people and employees. It's about stakeholder evaluation. It's about supply chain management. It is so much, and they don't have the knowledge. So they don't know how to strategically benefit from how unsustainability today unfolds on the market. They don't know. They don't have the knowledge. And when you bring it to them, for instance, we have done it even with the gasoline company in Sweden, and after a few changes for a couple of years, they asked for higher tax on gasoline. We've had Electrolux ask for higher tax for heavy metals in batteries before anyone else, because they had to begin to develop the future markets for it. IKEA, which we trained many years ago, were not satisfied with the REACH regulation from the European Union on chemicals. They wanted it to be much, much harsher, because they had earned money since a decade of going ahead of the game. And they knew how to do it stepwise and bringing about good bottom line business from it as well. So the reason why the others don't is not that they don't love their children, it is not that they don't think that the planet matters, it's because they don't know how to move from where they are today, stepwise to sustainability, and capitalize on the journey. And that is something that can be educated, that's what I'm saying.
Tetsuo, do you have any comments, or your colleague, about what the paper so far, etc.?
Well, I think the system amendment, you have something.
No, I'm fully satisfied in listening to the discussions. I think the way forward, which Bob is suggesting, is basically we are agreeable to.
Yeah, I just have one follow-up point on that. I think the last couple of comments have been pointing at some really good examples in the private sector, but I think there are also examples to get maybe a bit to Julia's point, of sort of lower scale public sector kind of successes from the past. There's examples, I think, Bunker, you mentioned one on the social participation side. There's also examples, I think I was just seeing the other day, that the state of Amapá in Brazil has maintained forest cover and increased protected area and seen an increase in HDI. So countering the conventional wisdom, that kind of example, you can check the facts on that, but pull out examples like that, especially ones that are sort of south examples. And we should think about public sector, private sector, where are the other places we want to go to highlight those.
Exactly.
Yeah, could I just ask, what do people feel about what we should say in relation to beyond Rio? Because picking up on what Julia said, I feel it's quite important to think about what we'd like to see come from Rio. I mean, we're minded to push for some kind of process for sustainable development goal planning. How does one do that? What might we propose in terms of global learning groups, bringing together different kinds of actors, mapping out together what seem to be sensible, grounded goals that can be taken forward and agreed maybe in 2015. I mean, is that somewhere we want to go, or is that kind of putting off the big decisions? I don't see anything happening in Rio in terms of agreeing anything other than maybe some commitment on sustainable energy for all. And I think in lots of ways it would be better to say, actually what we agree is a 2-year process that brings us something much more concrete and practical.
Well, Bob, just to pick up on that, and actually to go back to what Emily said, I think if Rio would come out with, or we would insist that the only way to get on this journey to sustainable development is to treat these issues in an integrated manner. It was very nice to start to define sustainable development, which I guess IUCN actually did in 1981, in the 3 pillars, but it just doesn't work. Those pillars don't talk to each other. And so the way that our governments are set up, and I'm not even going to say again how unimportant most ministers of environment are, but those are separate. And just to get together from time to time with the Minister of Finance, it doesn't make any sense. So how can we, to get to those sustainability goals, we have to organize ourselves in a way where we're forced to be together, like we're here in this room, although we all agree on things.
It does. To get together with ministers of finance from time to time.
It's already better than nothing.
No, because they organize the budget, you know. So, you know, in the business as usual, the ministries of environment get, you know, 0.5% of the budget, you know, and then they struggle for, instead of 0.5%, 0.51, you know, and so on. Then comes the big conference like that, you know. And then the people in finance say, well, we have to do more. You know, so. But Bob, I'm fascinated by the way you put it, that you need regulation plus behavioral changes. Now, could you elaborate that? Which comes first? Would you venture in saying, so that because regulation is based on technology, on good technological information. You know, and when you write regulation, you have to do it correctly. You know, you need the information from scientists. That's a place where scientists are essential. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
It was really just a straight observation. I've never seen any major issue ever dealt with without. It had to be cognizant of what was technological possibilities. But it should never say, and it never did say, what the technology should be. I've often found that if you've got a regulation, it stimulates a technological transition. In other words, which comes first, the cart and the horse? Yeah. And I think every time we've put a regulation down on the few things I've looked at, the private sector says, my God, I've got to do this. They find a way of doing it. Yeah. So you have to know it's feasible, you know, technologically feasible, but you know, on the CFCs, which now when we look back was a trivial issue, relatively speaking, but I said, you'll never phase out this and this and this use. As soon as we said, we're going to phase those chemicals out, industry rose to the challenge and found actually quite cost-effective solutions. So there is a little bit of a cart and a horse, but I've never seen pure behaviour change, let's say, other than a local pond ever work.
Disclosed, and now they challenge that, so it hasn't been disclosed yet. But this same thing, that's almost surely funded by, involves one of the things that kept proving tobacco didn't cause lung cancer, and it's probably funded also massively by ExxonMobil, but maybe not. But they've just released a big report, which is a swinging attack on the Royal Society's position, and I was given a heads up on this, and what I've done is said, I'm not going to do anything, but the press officer at the Royal Society in those days is now working for Nick Stern, and I said, for God's sake, get him on it quick. It's a great attack dog. But in short, I don't think one is ever going to get anywhere without things coming from the bottom up. But equally, it's going to be very hard to get things coming from the bottom up if we don't also have support at the top. So, because there's really well-organised, totally cynical, totally dishonest opposition.
So far, I've not heard any contradiction.
No, I think you agree. I don't disagree with a lot of that stuff. I just don't want to say we got a lot of reason for hope. What?
But we could have reason for hope if there were a lot more of them, if there really were a meaningful movement. I mean,
Which was your point?
It sounds like the Occupy Wall Street isn't very well organized. This wasn't a bad idea, but there could be a movement to really scale up these things.
But Bob took notes about that an hour ago. I saw him doing it, so
Okay.
this is dealt with, I think.
Good.
Bye.
Yeah, by the way, if I can just come back to the paper then. You know, one issue that I don't think we're addressing here, but it is addressed quite a lot, much to my surprise, in the Global Sustainability Panel paper, and that is education. Really, I mean, that's really where we don't have much time anymore, but we still need to get to the youngest people in our society and not educate them in different silos and get them to understand. It's starting to work, but not, again, that's not also a global movement. I don't know, we don't touch upon that at all.
I think when we come back after lunch, which we'll break in about 10-15 minutes, I think we look at that initial outline that I put together, ask if that is the right outline, what's missing from it, or what isn't important.
The outline is the chapter headings of what you sent yesterday.
It's the original outline,
okay, yeah.
where I actually sort of get asked different people to write different pieces,
I like
basically.
that,
So we should ask ourselves, is that still roughly the right there or not? How do we embed top down and bottom up? But also, what issues are missing where I didn't ask anyone to write? So I didn't ask anyone to write on education. I didn't actually ask anyone to write on sort of research and development, or on potentially the role of national and/or international assessment. So when we look at the original outline, how do we want to modify it? Because I think one can actually embed the local stories within something like the current outline, but we can look at that. But what issues are missing, and do we have time to quickly write something? I mean, on issues, if we want to write something on the importance of, the challenges facing us on research, I'm sure we can write that very quickly. Or are international or national assessments important? We can write something quickly on that, that's easy. So we should look to see what should the structure be, how does it need to be modified, which pieces we've already got that we can start to plug in, and where do we have a few gaps, like we've identified adaptations missing. If we want something on education, we probably have to write a short piece. It doesn't mean to say that everything we have in the 10-pager, there has to be a backup document. It would be nice if there were backup documents. It's not necessary. It's not like an IPC summary, where if it isn't in the back document, you can't bring it to the front. We can certainly put something in the front that is not necessarily one of the individual contributions. So I think we think of the 10-pager or thereabouts. What do we want to say? How do we say it? And then we worry about sort of getting the missing text, basically. So in other words, if we were to ask Celine to put together something on adaptation for the main 10-page document, which might be half a page or something, doesn't mean to say it's got to have 2,000 words. In fact, if he wants to write 2,000 words, that's great, or 1,500. So we can do it that way. So I think the thing to think about for after lunch is, what's this outline going to be? Recognising we do want to bring in the stories, etc. And in fact, I mean, a bottom line story can well be, there are many, many things going on at the local level. However, in spite of these, we are still seeing climate change moving at an unsustainable way. We are still losing biodiversity. We're still seeing urban pollution at an incredible level. So we could find a way of framing this story.
Okay. Lots of great things are going on at the bottom globally. Great things happening. World Bank is not listening, they're not changing their policy, governments are not listening, they're not changing their policy.
So why say that?
So that's what we have to say.
I can say that.
We're not even saying that we can do this independently or in isolation. It has to be a partnership and someone has to learn.
Exactly.
And there are so many success stories that World Bank is not listening and not learning, and governments are not learning, and they have to look at this. So this is the thrust of the paper. We're not saying that we are the answers to everything, but there are some people who should live and learn what's happening on the ground, and they're not listening. Why not? Give us some examples. Give us some reasons why it's not listening. So that is the angle that we should have in our paper.
I don't think anyone will disagree with that,
No,
actually.
right. We all agree.
Great things happening.
And I also agree that from bottom up is going to be more important than top down. We've sort of proved that.
Yeah.
in the green world that we're going to create, it's got to be the same from the top down too.
It's going to need both.
It's going to be both, and we need to make sure good people get up to the top.
And it's not just governments, it's the private sector. I mean, it's all relevant actors, basically.
I'd like to get the humor in too.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we
Yeah,
give the
Yeah. I didn't take anything. I took a little pill once or so on the way over, and then I threw it away. You know,
Thank you.
It's very hard to respond emails.
No, I didn't know. I left the office early yesterday.
Okay. Fine.
Different solutions.
I'm not that silly.
I'm not that silly. I'm another silly.
How about it?
How was the southern?
It was good. It was good.
Beautiful.
Very enjoyable.
Beautiful.
Wales. Only saw a couple actually, a few humpbacks. Once he came with a place to go. Oh yeah.
いないのか。
He's meant to be. Yeah. He's meant to be. Oh. Nick said he was coming, didn't he?
そういうことなんですね。
はい、とりあえず今の時点で、エクスペクトしていた方は皆さん。
そうだね。そうそう。サリムさんはあれインドネシア大使館連れてくるはず。サリムさん。
私たちより先に出たんですけど、ただ奥さんたちも全員乗り込んで、なんだかんだインドネシア語で喋った末に行ったんで、もしかしたら奥さんたちどっかに連れて
あ、そうどっか行くんだろ。
知りません。ピカデリかなんかに行ったのかもしれないですね。
じゃあいいや。
私よりもちょびっと5分10分5分ぐらい早く出たんですけど。
If people would like to take their seats, maybe we can make a start.
Gets irritated every time I ask you, what is the spread? I don't want to talk about it. The prediction for Britain.
There's tea and coffee just behind us if people want to.
High 60 millions to 89 million in Germany. And it's a huge difference in climate change
Okay. Why
don't we go around the table in a minute? No.
We have enough room there.
Good morning, everybody. I think let's make a start. A few people will be arriving a little late. I'm Salim al-Haq. I'm not Camilla Turman. I'm standing in for Camilla. She should be on her way and will be joining us in a little while. I used to be the head of the climate change program here at IID. I'm now a senior fellow, and I'm in the process of relocating to Bangladesh to set up a new international center for climate change and development, which is a joint venture between IID and a university in Bangladesh called the Independent University. And Camilla, as I said, is going to be a little bit late. She's just coming in this morning and she'll join us. So on behalf of IID, I just wanted to welcome all of you. It's very nice to have you here in our relatively new offices in London. We've been recently to this building. As I said, there is coffee and tea just behind us. The restrooms are upstairs. There's also a cafeteria on the ground floor if you want to go and sit and relax during the breaks. There are some sofas and places to sit and relax there. And I think lunch will be served there as well. So without further ado, I just wanted to thank you all for coming, welcome you to London and to IID, and then perhaps hand over to Sanajima to give a little background on the purpose of the meeting, and then Bob will take us through the rest of the proceedings.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you all for coming to this London meeting of the Good Climate Prize laureates. And I think I've already introduced myself to several of you, or most of you. My name is Shinichi Samejima, and I'm currently the Senior Executive Director of the Scientific Foundation. And the Blue Planet Prize, as you know, was established in 1992, the year when the Earth Summit was held in Rio de Janeiro. The foundation announced the first prize winners there, and the first prize winners were, who are both present today, Dr. Syukuro Manabe and the IID, International Institute for Environment and Development. And since then, the Asahi Glass Foundation has continued to commend those who have made a significant contribution towards solving global environmental problems for 20 years. Last year, the prize winners were Dr. Jane Lubchenko of the United States of America and the Barefoot College. Today we have Mr. Bunker Roy, who is the founder of the Barefoot College here. Through our activity of awarding the prize and presenting the achievements each prize winner has made, the foundation has continued to raise awareness of the general public worldwide toward the problems we face regarding the global environmental situation. And a year and a half ago, the foundation, together with 8 Blue Planet laureates, published a book titled "Conditions for Survival" to alert the world that we now must act. And for those, and we have Dr. Salin, Dr. Oliver, as the two of the authors who have made contributions to the book. And a lot of people worldwide are now greatly concerned about the global environment. And on top of them are, I think, the Blue Planet Prize laureates. This year is the 20th anniversary of the Rio Summit, and there began a move to take the opportunity and to reshape the global environment toward a really sustainable Earth. We, the foundation, was honored and was happy to hear from the laureates that as Blue Planet Prize laureates, they will compound a paper to lay out what is needed to tackle the current situation. The foundation decided immediately to support the initiative, and today we gathered here in process of finalizing the paper. The foundation would like to thank all of the laureates who expressed their support for the initiative, and special thanks are to Dr. Sir Bob Watson for taking the lead in this initiative and eventually presenting the paper to UNEP and on other occasions. We would like also to thank IID for kindly offering the place where we can meet for the effort. The meeting will start from now, and once again, the foundation would like to thank all of you for coming a long way to participate in the effort. We look forward to the success of the meeting and a sustainable Earth guided by the paper raised in this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bob, do you want to start now? Or should we go around?
Yeah, I think we should go around the table and introduce ourselves. I'm not sure everyone's met each other. Bob Watson, I'm currently Chief Scientific Advisor at DEFRA and the University Academic at the University of East Anglia.
Ivy Wellman, Bob's Private Secretary at DEFRA. Good to meet you all.
I'm Tesserol, ADA.
Will Tenner in the Science Division of Conservation International.
I'm Mr. Salim from Indonesia, University of Indonesia. I'm Chairman of the Presidential Council of Presidents.
I'm Roy from the Barefoot College, India.
Karl-Erik Robert, Professor of Sustainable Development in Sweden, and founder of the NATUSTEM NGO.
I'm Hal Mooney, I'm from Stanford University in California.
I'm Robert May from Oxford University, and I was until recently, first 5 years of this century, the President of the Royal Society, and I also was much associated with the early days of IED and Richard Sandberg and so on. I'm not like to be here.
Welcome back.
Syukuro Manabe, located at Princeton University.
José Goldenberg, University of Sao Paulo in Brazil.
Paul Ehrlich from Stanford, Hal Mooney's Chief Assistant.
We're clearly overrepresented from Stanford. Okay, well, really appreciate everyone coming and actually even more making contributions. The idea of this paper was when Tetsuo and I were talking middle to late last year when he mentioned to me, which I should have known anyway, it's the 20th anniversary of the Blue Planet Prize, and sort of we just chatted about was there a way to celebrate it. my thought was simply, how about getting a paper put together by a number, as many as possible, of the Blue Planet laureates? I keep getting really fed up reading papers written by Nobel Prize winners who don't know what the hell they're talking about, pontificating on climate change or other issues on either side of the debate. So it struck me that what would be much more rational would be a paper by a number of people who truly do know what they're talking about, rather than just those Nobel Prize winners. Also, of course, Rio+20 is coming up in June of this year, pushed back to so that the Queen can celebrate her anniversary, which I was amazed they did, but never mind. So the idea originally was to get a series of contributions that I would try and put into a sort of a long 50, 60 page paper, but then there was a suggestion from Carl Henrik about a slightly different approach, which I actually really prefer, which is each person can write their own individual contribution, and that would be a series of annexes. From that we would cull the key messages from each of the papers and try and put something like a 10-page paper together, and from that a really hard-hitting 1 to 2 page executive summary. I've got a whole series, and they've all been distributed, of the sort of the papers, which are typically 2,000 words plus or minus a little bit, and everyone then did contribute a series of 6 bullet points. One reverse was actually, I managed to persuade, because I was sharing a cabin with him in Antarctica, so I kept beating up on him, and that is Jim Hansen actually sent me some bullets, but hasn't given me the 1,500 page paper yet, but Jim will also send a 1,500 page, 1,500 word paper on climate change. What I then did was I was hoping to do a decent synthesis, and what I've done is a half-assed integration, which you have in front of you, which is about 12 pages long. And literally all I've done is taken the various sort of key messages that you sent me from each of your papers and tried to put it into sort of something that starts to flow, but I do stress starts to flow. It's quite clear that as one looks at this, there are pieces missing. So I think our key job this week is to first agree what should the outline be of this about 10-page paper, and then 2, what material goes where, and can we get it to flow, and from that really come up with literally a 1 to 2 page executive summary. Now there has been some to-ing and fro-ing about whether there should be a press event, and I'm in your hands on whether we think this is a good idea or not. The original idea for a press event was to do it at the UNEP Governing Council meeting in Nairobi in about 2 weeks' time, 2.5 weeks' time. The press officer there felt, however, that it would be more powerful if one could do a press event where a whole bunch of Blue Planet laureates were present, which I fully agree. Hence, did we want to do something this week? So I think the challenge before us now is effectively, will we have something by Friday, which I think is when something's tentatively scheduled for Friday, and if so, what are we going to give them, basically? And we can actually have it as a full press event, or we could actually have it as a sort of something which we embargo until we actually present the paper in Nairobi on whenever it is, February the 20th, I think it is, Monday, February the 20th. So there is a couple of events in Nairobi, which if any of you want to come to it with me at Tetsura, that would be absolutely great. But what we have is about 10 to 12 minutes in plenary with all the ministers, plus a 1-hour side event on the same day, Monday the 20th, and still potentially a press event, but that's unclear to me at the moment.
That's the General Assembly of UNEP.
Yeah, it's the General Assembly of UNEP. They meet they meet every 2 years formally and have a special session every other alternate year. So this is one of their special sessions, which they're hoping a significant number of ministers would go to. So we have, as I say, a small slot in plenary, and we have a side event. We also have an event at this Planet Under Pressure, which some of you might, whether that event will be any good, they're hoping for somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 scientists to attend it in London in late March. What they've done, mainly because the Blue Planet Prize, Blue Planet actually gave them a significant contribution of money recently. In the opening evening, The chair of the whole meeting is going to give a talk, and then we have a chance to also give our paper at the same time. So right at the very, very beginning, basically. Not sure how much time we have for it, but that should also be a very visible event. So what my thought is what we need to do is agree on what the outline of this paper is. If we all agree, should be a 10 to 12 or 8 to 15, whatever you want, page paper. Agree on the outline to see if we can flow. See what material we think we've got that fits it. See where we think there's some significant gaps. So I'll give one very obvious gap. I mean, there's several. But one obvious gap is there's nothing about adaptation to climate change. There's a lot of mitigation to climate change. The human climate is already changing and will continue to change. There's very little, if anything, in this paper at the moment on the issue of adaptation. So clearly that needs to be in there. There's also an issue that we may or may not want to bring up at all, and that is if we fail to go to a low carbon economy, is plan B or plan C geoengineering or not? Do we want to even raise the issue? And if so, how do we want to raise the issue? Obviously, highly controversial issue. Issues such as if we want food security, do we want to raise issues such as genetic modification or not? So there's a whole bunch of things that we can either decide to raise or not raise in our paper. We can stay silent on some of these controversial issues. We can raise them if we want to. I'm sure there'll be a spectrum of views around the table on each of those issues. There's nothing, unfortunately, there was going to be a section on subsidies, which of course are in most cases highly perverse, do nothing for the Treasury and actually hurt the environment. We were going to have a section on it. Unfortunately, I'm trying to think who was originally going to do that. Yeah, exactly. But unfortunately he's ill and was unable to sort of write a section. So if we want something on subsidies, we need to do it ourselves. Obviously several of the papers cover the same ground, especially on ecosystem and ecosystem services. I find no difficulty there. I mean, we've got one that was put together clearly by Will Turner on behalf of Conservation International and IUCN. We've got one from Likens and we've got one from Howard. Don't see any problem with it. They broadly say the same thing, and therefore they're perfectly fine as individual papers at the back. And even if they actually disagree, fine, we can bring those disagreements to the front, so it isn't an issue as far as I'm concerned. That's all I really wanted to say. I'd like to get people's views on how you all think we should proceed, etc.
Well, before you go into the substance, you mentioned two events. One is the UN General Assembly, and the other is a plenary pressure.
Yeah.
Plenary pressure is a big science meeting with some statements. The UNEP General Assembly is a possibility of getting into something that flow from it. Well, what about 3+20? I thought that was one of the original objectives. Is there anything?
I don't know if we've got any chance of getting anything on Rio+20. I mean, it's only now a 3-day meeting, and they're still thinking whether it'll be heads of state. So I don't know if there's any chance. We can obviously make sure the paper's distributed there.
Yeah.
The other thing we can do, once we finish this thing, I plan to immediately give it to my Secretary of State that's going to head the UK delegation. The question is whether others can give it to whoever's heading their national delegation. So whether Jose can get it to the minister in Brazil, whether we can send it to it. Well, I've given up on the US actually. Give it to whoever's
to John Bolton. He probably won't be able to do
it.
it.
Exactly. No, exactly. That's exactly why I made that comment. So one possibility is making sure we get it to sort of the heads of the delegations that go to Rio+20.
But there is no, I mean, there's nothing, it's sort of an information document then, rather than directed toward any policy target.
Well, my only point is, if the paper's going to have any influence, it's got to do it almost now. By the time it gets to Rio+20, it's way, way too late. So that's why I'm hoping once we've got this sort of 10-page document with a 1 or 2-page summary, I plan to give it to my Secretary of State immediately. Because if it's going to have any influence on the UK position, it's got to be now, not in 3 months' time, basically. That would be my point. I believe there's going to be a science event for 1 week before Rio Plus 20, which I gather is almost a follow-on to the Planet Under Pressure, which I believe IUCN is organising, and ICSU is organising. Given we know now who's the new head of the executive secretary of ICSU, Steve Wilson, we can try and persuade him that the paper should be presented a week before. But if it's going to do any good, we've actually got to get it to the people that are going to represent their governments now, not a week, not during Rio Plus 20. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, can I just introduce myself? I'm Camilla Tallman, Director of IIED. I'm very sorry not to have been here when you arrived, and I'm more than delighted that we could host this meeting, and I'm pleased Celine could say hello to you on behalf of IIED. I'm very much hoping that everything runs according to plan. We've got a number of people who can help with any logistical issues. I think you've met Charlotte, my assistant, who was here at the door when you arrived. So please do let us know if there's anything that we can do to make your stay here as productive and as comfortable as possible. We can't do anything about the weather. I did want to say we are hosting a 2-day meeting in Rio at the Catholic University of Rio. Those 2 days will follow the 5 days of ICSU's meeting. So ICSU are taking the Catholic University up until the 15th. We're taking it for the 16th and 17th of June. So we would be really delighted to have some kind of platform for presentation and discussion of these issues. Quite clearly, it's much too late if we want to feed into any kind of substantive document, but that does provide another opportunity.
Well, I don't know the British press situation like I ought to probably, but it seems to me we can make multiple uses of this. I think there'd be a huge advantage if you can get the press there to have this group or some subsection of this group talk to the public, because I think if there's any chance of getting anything done in Rio, it's going to be largely bottom up. And I think to miss that just because we have a paper coming out later, which the public will never see anything of, would be a mistake. The only other thing I would say is I agree with Bob entirely about getting it out there maybe on the 21st, but in the U.S. President's Day is the 20th. It might be a tricky time to get things out there, but all of us could feed it into whatever press did. So I think one of our main goals is just to find 6 or 7 points that we can all agree on, and leave the other things for the papers to get out and say, these are gigantic problems.
Bob, to be effective with the government, we have to act now. Because there is a document here which has been prepared by the Secretariat of the United Nations, which is the document that will be negotiated within commas, you know. There are brackets and things like that. And you know, there is something for everybody here. If you read it, you convince yourself that you know, it's not a motherhood kind of thing. What I think people are relatively interested, including the regional government, is, well, what do you do about it? I mean, to be more specific, you know, so what I would expect is that in this 1 or 2 page document, one would have sort of specific actions, you know, which could change the language. You know, there are, you know, 128 products here. Yeah. And we should pick up on you know, 4 or 5 in which governments could act. And you know, the idea of you know, passing it to the UK person or president, I think it would be welcome in some sense, because really, if you read this, you don't know what to do. It sounds like motherhood. Is this a good word in English?
Yeah. Motherhood and apple pie.
Okay. And so my hope is that one would be able to contribute.
How many people have got a copy of this? I haven't actually seen it, only because of...
Is this the GSP, the panel on sustainability, or is this the zero draft?
No, this is the UN
zero draft.
We get copies of it. That would actually
we can get copies of it. Yeah,
that would be very helpful.
Could I make a concrete suggestion, for example? What if we can get There's a high correlation between the status of women and the total fertility rate. Not clear whether it's causative or not, but nonetheless, if so much money was put into spreading family planning, there's an argument about how much is really a financial problem and so on, and how much unmet need there is. But it's a win-win. We know if you put money into family planning, you get modernization, all sorts of changes in the society. And as far as I'm concerned, I know a number of people here agree with that. This is a huge elephant in the room.
Just to amplify that, there are studies that show in sub-Saharan Africa, women that complete primary education have 1.5 fewer kids. Women who complete secondary education have a further 2 fewer kids, 3.5, and there aren't enough women who complete tertiary education to get statistics. And yet, you're going to have your meeting in the Catholic University. What a good place to raise this issue, because under the current fascist Pope, there's an office in the Vatican under Trujillo is responsible for deliberate dissemination of information about condoms. And you could really, that is a very good issue for your meeting at the Catholic University.
Yeah. Lots of things. Why don't we do the following? I think that is a good way. We can just interject. Let's see if there's any other comments first on the issue of demography and population. Then let me go round the table and get everyone to sort of make what they think the key points are. Let me make a quick key point on the issue of population. On this trip I just come back from, sort of where there was 150 of us on a boat, it was probably the most eclectic group I've ever been. Sort of some real rich fat cats there, basically. These 6 billionaires, all with strong views. Ted Turner was there.
Scholes was there.
Scholes was there. Yeah, I mean, and the issue of demography, population came up. It came up from Ted Turner, who's basically making exactly the same points. And it came up from Tokyo, who's a South African minister. I argued back against them in the sense that I did disagree with them, but it's only half the equation. The other half is the way we consume, basically. And otherwise it sounds like we're just blaming the South again, that it's a population issue.
No one differs with that.
So as long as we make sure we've got, you've got 5% of the world's population, the US, consuming 25% still, as long as we can put both very fairly on the table.
Arguing which is more important is like arguing whether the length
We need both.
Yeah,
We need
no,
both.
no, you can't argue whether the length or width of a rectangle is more important than
But it remains a fact that most of the climate change discussions, which are what originally prompted this, are focused on the impact per person issue, which is, as you say, half of it, and has deliberately avoided the number of persons, which is the other half.
Yeah.
Nobody would disagree.
So as long as we're nice and bad. So let's go around the table and get everyone's on any issue.
I have one more comment
Okay.
about that,
Yeah.
and it's about causality, because there's no doubt there is a relationship between if females are educated or not to population increase. But there are other issues as well, if we take care of the kids or not, so that they either die in all ages, or if we take care of them. Likewise, if we take care of the elderly, for instance, is positively correlated to transitions relatively early with regard to population increase. The issue is what is post and proctor, what is the causality, and I heard Paul mention family planning, but I think that it could as well be that you first have to implement those things, and then only then family planning would be helpful. And I think that brings us back to what we should say about social development and how to take care of each other, and how that is positively correlated to relatively early transitions, as opposed to one part of the world keeping the others in poverty, which is actually more causal, as I believe it is. So I think we should certainly
No
mention
difference on the equity issue. Family planning, you got to watch out, because unfortunately, family planning, a lot of people think that if we're going to plan to breed, that if we're going to breed like rabbits, we have a plan to do so.
Yeah.
I like the term population control, but that turns everybody off. That's facts.
I just mean turning to with family planning to areas where you have extreme poverty and inequity and so forth.
There's one other key point in here, if I can monopolize the discussion for just another minute, and that is, there's a very interesting difference Namely, if you look at the population situation, we should have started a long time ago, because if you're going to solve that humanely, it's going to take a long time. If you look at consumption, if you could actually tackle on that, that could be changed damn near instantaneously. Of course, Britain and the United States showed that very well at the beginning of the Second World War, as did some other countries. You can totally transform consumption in a society if you've got a top-down and bottom-up simultaneous.
Yes, as long as we correlate consumption to resource flows, material resource flows, because there is so much else we can consume. So that we don't build in assumptions when we talk that underpin misconceptions amongst the people we turn to. Because they think that we need to go back to the Middle Ages in order to satisfy us who propose sustainable development, which is simply not true. And we should avoid any saying that could be misinterpreted that way. I understand that nobody in this room does, but we should be very careful when we express those points so that we are not misinterpreted.
Any other comments then on the issue of population? Right. Okay. I also get that everyone believes this should be a central one of our points that we need to make.
About population, I read this one very quickly and last night, but it was discussing women and the issue, but it's not very explicit how women and the issue are related to the problem at hand by reading that summary alone, so that I would like to have you made more explicit how exactly that is related to the problem of the environment.
Okay, so that's in Bob's paper. You want it sort of brought out a bit more? Yeah, I mean, clearly, I think what we're all arguing for is we need to get to grips with the issue of population through education of girls, empowerment of women, acceptable forms of contraception, recognising also that healthcare, reduction in child mortality is also the fourth key area there.
There's an interlinked set of things, which is education, healthcare,
exactly,
non-coercive availability of choice.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the Millennium Development Goals do not say the word population, and that's not an accident. It's a coalition of the unwilling lobby for that.
Oh, almost certainly, yeah, exactly. Okay, so why don't we go around the table commenting either on key areas you'd like to see brought out in this paper, and or at the same time talking about sort of each press event, so you can talk about both. So what we've so far talked about on the outreach is what sort of press events we want, how we use national delegations, target the opportunity at UNEP Governing Council. We've got Planet Under Pressure, and there's the potential of something around Rio +20, certainly in the Catholic University event, potentially others if we get in touch with ICSU. Fine. Okay. Paul, other key points you'd like to make? The population one is clearly one.
Well, honestly, yeah. One is I think we ought to emphasize the non-linearities. Everybody says, oh, we're just going to add 2.5 billion people by 2050. The fact that that's going to almost certainly have gigantically more impact than the last 2.5 billion is missed. Another thing, which is one of my prejudices, but shared I know with somebody in the room, is that there's too much emphasis on climate as the only environmental problem when it may not even be the most serious. And I'd love to see us somehow. I remember being at a press conference before the Gore election, where it was on the environment, but every single question from the press was on climate. Nothing on toxification, nothing on the loss of ecosystem services, nothing on biodiversity, and so on. And we could have some ameliorating effect on that.
I don't think you'll get any disagreement in this room that that was the same thing that happened on this Antarctic trip, because Gore sort of organised, and it was climate, so I kept going, biodiversity, and you know, also how you link it to what people care about. No one cares if it's going to get 2 degrees warmer per se. How does it affect food security, water security, energy security, human security? I think we've got to place this within the development context, basically, and it can't just be climate change. But again, I don't think we get any disagreement around this one. So it's setting it up right at the beginning. Jose.
I think one of the points that we should touch is the question of energy. Actually, the United Nations Secretary General did something about it, to my surprise actually, but he did. He convened a group which prepared their report, which recommended two things. First, universal access, which is actually relatively easy to achieve. You know, it was even quantified how much money was going to be needed for that and so on. And a number of countries are doing it. You know, South Africa, Mexico, Brazil, and so on, are doing something about universal access, which has to do with the question of non-linearity. You know, as you increase population, you increase access. You know, non-linear effects come up. So I think we should support that. I think it was a good effort by the UN Secretary General. We should support that. And the other point is that energy is not about the cost of petrol at the pump station. The question of energy security is really very dominant. You know, well, I don't have to tell you, people would go to war for these things, you know, and energy really at the bottom of some of these problems. You know, I think the overemphasis on climate has not been very too beneficial, you know, because you know, it sort of reminds you of Mark Twain. You know, you like to talk about the weather, but you don't know what to do about it. Well, if you really want to do something about the climate, you have to act on energy. You know? And I think that the views that Emory prepared, and so I think we could pick up on some of them, trying to emphasize that we have to get out of the fossil fuel area. Not only because of climate, but because these things are not going to last forever. And security is becoming, security of access is becoming very serious. Now, one thing that I find not very clear in this paper, Bob, I want to mention it right now, because I think this is one of the points that will start to be of interest to people reading. You have a section here on the importance of good governance, which I think is very welcome. And I don't know how to say it, you know, but people really don't know what to do. You know, I mean, good governance is, of course, makes all the difference. But would we be able to say something about what they should do? Because I don't know, you know, my points on population are very naive, but the Chinese government did adopt a one-child policy. You know, this is a great step, you know. Would it be proper for us to endorse a strong position on getting out of the fossil fuel area or something like that?
Oh, I think I'll be very surprised if we can't say we must get out of the fossil fuel area, especially the way we do it today. I'll be very surprised. But I think what you're saying on the governance is a good theoretical, it's a good treatise on government, but we're not telling people what to do. So
can we go a bit forward? Well,
sorry?
Could we go one step further? You know, because you know, every time you have elections, you know, people say, well, we'll be better than our previous government, you know, and so good governance, I think people would agree with that, you know, but it has to be good governance that would do what, I don't know, put a tax on carbon or something like that, you know, some leading suggestion, you know, I'm always, maybe I was in government for too long, you know, I'm not anymore, but you know, this is what people inside government are discussing all the time, you know, what do we do? Then you look at your former colleagues at the university because, and research institutions, because that's the place from where these ideas come, you know, and we should just claim for good governance is not enough. That's my point.
Okay, you're being cruel to even discuss it in front of Americans today.
Suki.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more about the importance of emphasizing this energy security. The reason why I say so is that issue of global warming is used as an excuse not to do anything. Uncertainty about global warming is so large. Therefore, we should not do anything. And this is a strategy, I think, in most of the people who don't want to do anything, is to emphasize the uncertainty in global warming. And so it's just used as a convenient thing. And so this point that, in my opinion, energy security may be more important than global warming. But global warming is used as an excuse not to do anything. And so this point has to be made very clear. And so that's one point I agree with you fully about. Another important issue is this issue of adaptation, which you mentioned earlier. And what seems to be happening is the way it's going, no matter what you do, there is no question that CO2 is going to increase, doubles, and which is more like 2 degrees centigrade, but something like that. There is very little doubt by the middle of this century, no matter what you do, it's going to be. And then it's almost even beyond that, in order to make substantial contribution to reduce, prevent 3 degrees, would be extremely difficult unless we do draconian measures. So it is, in my opinion, it's practically things are going to happen almost no matter what we do. And the way it is going, particularly if you live in the United States of America, you know that it is very likely that doubling or more of CO2 is going to happen. And therefore then, I emphasize the effect of water issue, global warming. In my opinion, water is more important with regard to global warming than temperature. Temperature is a very relatively small issue, in my opinion. And so that it is not acceptable to not talk about adaptation, that's substantial. And as a matter of fact, it is much easier to convince politicians based upon what is happening now and gradually, as you know very well, the big flood is going to in Thailand recently, and I can explain the physical mechanism. It's going to, flood is going to increase, and drought is going to become more frequent. There is very little doubt about it. And it's much easier to convince politicians based upon what is happening already now, rather than talking about next generation, which is impossible. If I look at the politics in the United States of America and free conflict politics, it's impossible. If you are pragmatist, that it's very, very difficult. So that the best way to convince politicians is based on what is happening now. And for that reason, you have to talk about adaptation much more than it is now.
Right, I think a couple of things come out in there. And this is true on biodiversity, true. We know enough to act now. There may be some uncertainties in our knowledge base but we know more than enough to act now on energy security, climate change, biodiversity, etc. The other thing that I think we need to talk about, not this very second, but I believe the so-called 2-degree goal is absolutely impossible now to reach, and we're way on our way to 3 to 5 degrees Celsius. And I think, again, we might want to see if we all agree on it and a really hard-nosed statement about this. Okay, Bob.
I've got sort of 4 categories of things I'd like to briefly talk about. Firstly, or zerothly actually, I think this 12-page thing is a very, very good starting point. Not surprisingly, I'm an unabashed fan of
I'm surprised.
All I did was synthesize your 6 bullets.
The Millennium Ecosystem Assessment is just brilliant. And as I have no thoughts about how best to disseminate it, that's not something I'm knowledgeable about. However, one thing, just in the general, picking up some of the other things, and the way this is done, it could, I think, be further strengthened with a few more sort of specific quantitative facts that grab attention. It's a very, very good narrative, but just as an example, things that I find, well, that I always like, people can relate to. Fossil fuels, we're burning we're putting 1 million years worth of sequestered carbon back into the atmosphere each year. It only takes a phrase to say it, but I find to people, you put in that of course, it happens from day to day, but when it happens systematically, and then say something like, the last time we saw something like what we'll be seeing by 2050 is tens of millions of years ago. It brings it, it only takes a phrase. You made the excellent point about water. There's an estimate that global supplies of available fresh water will cross global demand will cross sustainable supplies by 2040. Again, a phrase that makes the thing more dramatic, and one of my favourites, ecosystem services. There's a very good discussion of it in sort of scholarly terms, but the thing that brings it home is, again, from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, 24 categories of ecosystem service, 15 are degraded, 4 that are rather peculiar are perhaps improved, and 5 we don't know enough to say. So that's one category. It's a tactical comment. Similarly, I believe that the tactical use of energy security, the argument that was just given, is a very strong one, and I think our own climate change committee doesn't make use of it enough. I think it's a really good argument, so I'd like to sort of second that. And finally, I'd like to ask, at least we consider 1 or 2 figures, because no amount of words or numbers gives, to my mind, the same emotional impact of just plotting the change in population growth, which most people think has just been some gradual thing that's got more, just over the last century, where it saw 2 phase changes. So that was... Go.
You know, we know enough to act now, but I think that's half true. Well, I think that where we don't know enough to act now is the area a number of you have mentioned, and that is adaptation. And I think that I just reviewed the science output of most notable papers from a nation recently in this area, and they were all, virtually 90% of them were on impacts, and just a few on adaptation. No one is really, the science community is not really raising to that challenge. And we have to, and I think we have to bring geoengineering in, because that's one of the scariest adaptations that's on the table. But there's a whole bunch of things which aren't on the table that should be, but there hasn't been any work on it. You know, we're going to have to adapt. There's no question of that. That things are, as you pointed out, the temperature alone, it's just one driver is going to be drastically different than it is today. As far as the paper goes, I think
to score by being relatively less of a problem and relatively more of a solution. They begin to turn to politicians and ask for tougher legislation, which we have seen a number of times, because they are already ahead of the game and they know that they are doing it both for in a sort of atmosphere of enlightened self-interest. They are earning from reducing their own impact on the system and being ahead of the game with regard to unfolding markets and so forth. And when they ask politicians for tougher legislation, then we have implemented the game as I think it should look like. But to run directly from resistant mayors and resistant CEOs of businesses who have fortunes to play around with and keep them in ignorance, and then expect summits to come up with some kind of very active solution is, in my mind, completely unfeasible. And my piece is about that there is a way of teaching them without being prescriptive. You cannot say that in the future we will only have wind power or photovoltaics or wave power or this kind of agriculture. But what you can discuss is that these are principles for sustainability. And what will the sufficient transition route look like in your region or in your company? Or teaching them how to ask questions rather than teaching them exactly what to do. And that will make future summits much easier and much more efficient. As it is now when Obama goes to Durban, he is stuck with decisions made in the Congress, which he cannot do anything about. And those decisions are based on flawed assumptions, poor knowledge, and misunderstandings. And as long as that is the case, we cannot expect governments to fix what we have today.
based on money too, you've got money.
But the self-benefit is there. If you gradually learn to strategically become part of the solution, you will actually avoid money problems that your competitors run into. And we have done a number of case studies on that since 20 years.
Let's welcome Julia from IUCN. Hi, Julia.
Can I ask you a question about process?
Right.
Because I find this, what I've heard so far, and this dialogue is just mind-blowingly fascinating and interesting, and I would love to sit here and talk like this for 2 days, or 3 days. But if we are to arrive at some conclusions as regards this paper and what to do after we have said goodbye, I think we need to come to grips with the process, what to expect from the meeting. How are we going to go through this? Because that is not clear in my mind, and I would just like to hear your points on that, Bob.
I'm hoping by the time we leave here, we will have got an agreed 1 to 2 page set of bullets and an agreed 10-page document that, yes, we want to read after we leave here, and send it to the half dozen people that are not here, who've contributed but not here, to see if they've got any significant changes. But I'd like to end up with something that looks very close to the final 10-page document and very, very, very close to the 6-7 points that we're going to make in 1 to 2 pages.
Very good. Are we going to do that by reading it through paragraph by paragraph and then hear what people say?
I think we have to first see what the outline should look like, and we got it roughly in the right order or not, and then I think break into into 3 or 4 groups for different people to work on different sections. That would be my suggestion, but very open to others. I don't think we should do it in plenary, not to start with. I think we need to break into smaller groups, probably into about 4 groups or 5 groups, to work on different pieces. Obviously there's at least 2 or 3 people who've written on the biodiversity issue, 2 or 3 people have written on climate change and energy. Others have already written on governance, etc. So I think we'll just think which is the best sort of subsets to break into, try and write it. But I would hope we'll come away at the end of the meeting with pretty much a 10-pager and a 1 to 2 pager as well. That's my goal.
And our contributions, the standalone pieces, how will they be dealt with in the final production?
I think there's 2 choices. One, if people want to read each other's to see, almost like a peer review and comment, but the ones at the back, the whole thing should be published together, so it'd be an executive summary, the 10-pager, then the individual contributions, obviously with their names on each of them. And effectively, as far as I'm concerned, it's up to each person to decide to finalise their individual contributions. I think there's a couple of questions we might ask ourselves. Like some of them effectively have got heavy reference in, some have got almost no reference in. Does it matter if the styles are slightly different in the individual pieces? I'm not sure it does matter that much, but we might want to at least chat about the relative styles of the individual pieces. But that's what I would hope we'd walk away from, is effectively, literally a pretty completed document that we would circulate to the others that have contributed, just to see if, on the 2-pager and 10-pager, just to see if they've got any comments, given their names will be on the front of it.
How will it be published and how will it be distributed?
I think that's what, again, they're the sort of things that we need to talk about. I mean, it can obviously, I presume, be published as a Blue Planet paper. The question is, do we want to try and sort of make more use of it and see if sort of something like Nature or Science would at least take the 2-page or something like that. But I'm in your hands. Some of you have got probably better connections to these journals than I have. But I think we should discuss exactly that while we're here. Okay.
We haven't finished the introduction yet.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, Julia Martin-Lefebvre, IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature. I think probably we tried to have a second name when we got the award, but we're no longer confusing the world, so it's not the World Conservation Union.
Okay.
It's the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
You have the floor, Julia. You have 10 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's carry on, man, and Julia will hear the rest, and then we'll come to Julia at the end. So, Bunker, you're going.
Are you already Sir Robert Bob? Not yet?
I'm not sure. It appears that you become it as soon as you're in the New Year's Honours list, but I haven't been docked on the shoulders. I'm a little worried she's going to go like this and then just like this. So we'll wait and see.
You want to be Sir Robert or Sir more demotic Sir Bob?
Definitely Bob.
I went for the dignified.
No question about that. That's what I thought on my phone.
When's that going to happen? June?
No idea. I haven't heard anything yet.
Okay.
So, thank you.
I have some problems with this paper, and I'm a member of the Secretary General's high-level group, and I said almost the same things there. Julia's will bear me out. Most important is, who are we writing this paper for? I hope we're not writing it for ourselves, because that will defeat the whole purpose. Sorry, just let me get this thing out. I think it's very important that we see a version of the document which has come out from the Secretary General's office. Julia, have you got a copy?
But I think on my computer.
I'm just getting some printed right
That's the
now.
Secretary General's or the United Nations one, I think?
Both.
Okay. So you have a copy of that?
I'm just getting
I think we should have a look at that, because
I've
we
got
should...
the Resilient People, Resilient Planet. That's the one you mean.
I'm not sure, is that the...
That's the Global
That's the Global
Sustainability Panel.
Sustainability Panel. But I think you're talking about the Secretary General's vision on sustainable energy for all.
Which is a separate document.
Right. Well,
Which is a separate document which we must access, and I think Akim will have it in Nairobi, and I think you should have a look at that. I have a problem with this paper because I think we need to address it as a global document and not one which only confines ourselves with scientists and professionals. We have to make it look like a document that everyone can either own or feel that they can do something about. It mustn't be a gloom and doom document. It must also give some feeling that we are in a position to act, and there is something at the end of the tunnel which makes it worthwhile. So maybe we need to demystify this document. Maybe we need to make it a bit more human, and so that the common man on the street can recognize it, can feel that they can read it, and not make it much too technical. How do you do that? Maybe that's the skill that we have to come up with somewhere. How about a bit of humor in this? So important that you can convey the most serious of messages with some humor. The Secretary General's document is so deadly dull, it is unbelievable. I don't know how people are going to read that. He's supposed to be writing it for 193 nations, but it almost looks like a World Bank document, and I think that's going to be terrible. So we are fighting that. Julia, you're on our side, right? Oh boy. And it's so deadly dull, it is unbelievable, and I think we have to do something about it to make it feel that people can read it. Someone in the middle of Fiji will not understand a word of that document, and he's a member of it. Secondly, I think we shouldn't give an impression that we are only going to act now. Lots of people have already acted for many years, and it might be a good idea to learn from that action, especially if it has a global impact. Lots and lots of people, I don't know if Conservation International has some projects on the ground which has already had an immediate impact. I think we should list some of these actions that have already taken place to show that there is some hope here. We shouldn't give a feeling that we're only acting now as of 2011, because lots and lots of people have already acted on these issues, and we should mention them somehow, somewhere. The challenges we're talking about, I feel we shouldn't stress that it is only a technical challenge. It is also a social challenge. The social challenge of good governance, corruption, wastage, how much funds are being wasted today in the name of the environment and climate change, poor technology choices that are happening all the time, and somewhere sitting very far away from these very vulnerable areas are making choices which are ridiculous, and I think it's damaging the communities at large, and I think that we have to stress on, that it's not a technical problem, it is also a social problem, this whole issue of climate change. Fourth, we should also not give an impression that this is a north-south problem. In fact, that is really the problem because it made it north-south. We should actually stress on the south-south areas of cooperation, which is the future, I think, today. The whole area of knowledge and skills and wisdom, which is prevalent in the south, underutilized, underdeveloped, under-recognized, I think we should bring back into the forefront. We should bring that onto the forefront. And we're not doing that enough. How much we can learn from the south, how much the north can learn from the south is something that should be stressed, because there is so much to learn from the south, and we haven't given that enough visibility. I think we should have a page on innovation, how people have acted. There's innovation everywhere, which is on the ground, which has tremendous possibilities of scaling up. We haven't given enough issues on that. For instance, on good governance, in India, there is this whole issue of public hearings on good governance, how people have come together to see information shared with the people, and public hearings where the bureaucrat, the contractor, the people are actually sharing information on the ground, and corruption levels have gone down drastically as a result of public hearings and social audits. I think that is an innovation we must mention when we talk about governance. So my feeling is that we should not make it in too much of a doom and gloom document. We should show that there is hope here. We should make it a bit more simple. We should make it a bit more human, make it a bit more readable. Not to say it's not readable, but I'm saying we must make it a bit more readable. And make people feel that they can own the document. How they can own it and feel, yes, well, after reading this, I can do something about it myself. Sitting in the middle of nowhere, I can do something about it myself. This is something that I think we have to reflect in this document. Strategically, I think in Nairobi, you should have Akin giving you a copy of that paper to Secretary General and see where are the gaps that we can fill up with this Blue Planet laureate paper, which will make it a bit more powerful together. That's about it for the start.
Let me make it. I think on the gloom and doom part, I think I think that's exactly what we need to get to. I think, however, we say, if we continue business as usual, we're stuffed. However, there are ways to move forward. In other words, we need to sort of the implications of inaction, but then show how we can act. Your very last point about ownership, I think, is a really good one. And that is, can we at the end of it, or somewhere, whatever the structure is, point out the role of different actors? What are some of the things governments can do? What are some of the things private sector can do? What are some of the things that individuals can do? That will actually sort of, and we've done it in a few documents. We did it at the end of the National Ecosystem Assessment. We actually wrote down, these are the sort of things that we expect different actors to be able to do. We did it in the technology transfer paper, the IPCC, the role of different actors. So that, I think, can get to your point of the various actors, basically. I think on the case studies, obviously we can point out some of the sort of things that have worked, but point out we have not gone to scale. In other words, we can't be so positive that it looks like everything's done and dusted, basically. So I think it's getting that balance, basically.
Just one point. I mean, who the audience is a crucial point, and which I thought about. I thought in the original letter of invitation, it was more. I thought that it was more for the policy maker community. And I think maybe we need maybe two papers, one like you're describing, and one like this, perhaps, if that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think my original, when we started talking, but this is everyone's paper, certainly not mine, is who are we aiming for? The initial thought I had was can we influence some of the governments to do something in Rio? I mean, can we actually get some action rather than just a bunch of, just some more rhetoric, which is what we keep getting. But let's come back to that, basically, because there's a real difference of writing this paper for the general public versus writing this paper for those that we want to influence, which is a combination. It is everybody. I mean, so you're absolutely right. In fact, if it comes across as pushing...
But half the people in governments, Bob, are semi-literate. They won't read more than a page. If you think you're going to influence them with a paper like this, we have to be very simple about it. And half these people change. By the time they get to Rio, half the ministers will have been transferred into something else. You know, this is the reality that we're facing all the time.
But before we can,
but we can't
try
make it so
to
low that it goes to the Tea Party in America.
Well, you can write the technical paper, and then you can rewrite the major or whatever.
Exactly.
The other terms, use them both.
Emil.
Thank you very much. I speak from the government point of view, nationally as well as regional, ASEAN and Asia. I like the introduction that has a dream, a world without poverty, equitable, respect human rights, and environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable. Up to now, we feel that has not been reached yet. When Asia faced the crisis in '98, the policy of IMF was contraction. It was successful, contract, but it creates a huge degree of poverty. 2008, we faced again a jump price increase of oil, again a policy of reduced subsidy and so on, well done by developing countries in Asia, especially Indonesia, but a huge increase of poverty. Second, we have to push export. You promote, and what are the commodities? Coal and palm oil. So you hit hard on production of coal and palm oil. What is my point? Here you have those that influence macro policy. IMF, World Bank, WTO. Here you have a developing country that follows these policies, but these policies are not in favor of poverty eradication as well as sustainable development. Why? Because WTO, IMF, the World Bank still follow a single track of development. GDP oriented, and GDP is a function of investment, macroeconomic policy, finance, blah, blah, blah. But when you ask what does affect poverty, and simultaneously environment, we don't get the proper answer. So the key, Mr. Chairman, is how to have moved away from a single track of economic development to a triple interdependent track of economic, social, and environmental development. So that when we talk about growth, it is not growth GDP only, but through these growth efforts affect poverty eradication through a development which is sustainable. Mr. Chairman, sitting in the government, up to now, we failed to meet A, B, C in a triple track of economic development. Is that a dream? No, it is possible. But we need to modify the target of growth. We need to modify the content of poverty and the content of environmentally sound development. If poverty is not only limited to income poverty, but also non-income poverty, meaning that the people in Indonesia are poor because of lack of connectivity, no transportation, lack of financial infrastructure, lack of human capability, education, health, and so on, lack of proper entry to resource exploitation. This is linked with the poverty. But then, related with the environment, how to have a different growth, a growth that does not exploit natural resource, but enrich natural resource. How can we have not only extension of land for palm oil, but how to raise the value added of palm oil, how to raise the value added of exports of copper, of tin, of nickel, and so on. But when we talk with the business of copper tin mining, then we feel that the trade system provides a low import duty for raw material import to the developing country, but a high import duty for processed mining products. So there is this. But when you ask what does the WTO do, they are doing nothing on this. So, Mr. Chairman, this is a global meeting next, what we have in the coming Rio. So what is necessary to address the way World Bank, IMF, WTO, and so on, are not promoting sustainable development. And that's why this triple economic, social, and environmental development must be pushed forward, including this Bretton Woods institutions and the WTO. Is it possible? Yes. What is the lesson that we have learned in Indonesia? If we talk rather regionally, ASEAN or Asia, you fly too high. But when you go down to, say, Indonesia, means West Indonesia, East Indonesia. China means West China, East China. North Philippines, South Philippines. North Vietnam, South Vietnam. And when you go down to the detail, and you ask for a geospatial mapping of it, and map in resource availability, one, and map of poverty distributions in the specific province, two, and map of the possibility of carrying capacity of nature, then you get a clear picture by overlaying all these maps that Indonesia's problem is not population as such, but is unequal distribution of population. More in the west, less of the east. The problem of Philippines is too high development north, but less development in the south, and so on and so forth. So, Mr. Chairman, we feel that global cooperation talks too high, which is not valid, solid for operational purposes. You need building blocks, and the building block seems to me based on regional cooperation. ASEAN regional cooperation is more effective. You talk business. How can North Philippines learn from West Indonesia, South from Philippines, from East Indonesia, and so on and so forth? So, this key question is that we don't have an integrated, triple, interdependent strategy of development. this report has somehow missed that line of triple interdependent strategy of development. It talks about environmental issue, climate change, yes, but when you do it, it is through development. But what type of development does not affect poverty? And what type, and so on and so forth. It's this interlink that I've missed in this particular paper that should be put upwards and address our friend in the World Bank, IMF, and WTO of looking to the macro development strategy. The other point in the next Rio meeting is the institutional framework of development. Correct, ECOSOC is important, but ECOSOC without IMF, World Bank, WTO is not an effective ECOSOC. You are planning to go to UNEP. I've been in the UNEP meeting. We talk among consultants. I mean, you cannot talk about things that has to do with macro finance policy. You cannot talk about things that is related with what type of poverty are we discussing. So it is talking about converters and therefore not effective. What is needed is not a Sustainable Development Council, but a mixture of those responsible for economic development, finance, World Bank, WTO, social development, here comes our friend of UNESCO, health and so on, and environmental development, here comes UNEP and FAO and the rest. These three must be in one forum, discuss things to be decided by the head of states. Rio must be in head of states not on issue of UNEP, but on issue of sustainable development, economic, social, and environment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, what I take out of that is several very major points. First, GDP is a very, very poor measure of wealth, and the question is whether we want to talk about the sort of the four measures of wealth: built capital, social capital, natural capital, and human capital, yeah, as something that theoretically should replace GDP, but at least should complement GDP at the very least, should complement it. Secondly, poverty is not only income, just as the World Bank report many years, Voices of the Poor. We need to point out poverty has many facets to it, basically. Third issue, which Bunker said as well, there's some South-South learning, and what you've really pointed out is effectively, we need to sort of look at this at a much more regional, sub-regional level to really understand within a context of a global approach. And in the governance paper, how do we actually bring together economic, social and environmental considerations? So I think there are 3 or 4 very major points that came out of what you said.
And you talk about food security. Maybe the proper language, food diversity. It's not lack of rice, not lack of wheat. Can we solve food security through food diversity? Can we solve energy security through energy diversity? Water through osmosis, sea water and so on.